Andy, welcome back. Thank you
It
so much
is
for joining us this evening.
absolutely my pleasure to be here again today, Michael.
All right, great. So, just to bring everybody up to speed before we start going into questions, can you please, tell everybody what you've been doing for the last, 10, 20, I guess, 30 years, how you got into all of this, and anything of note that people need to understand the context of what we're going to talk about tonight?
Sure. I'll say it briefly. It was I started in my family's commercial construction material supply company back in 1989. Had a project in Milwaukee in 1992 where workers were getting sick from the materials we were supplying, and it essentially launched a whole career for me supplying healthy, common sense, toxin-free building materials. Completely changed the direction of our family business, and really we're the pioneers in the healthy home movement back in 1993.
And have people followed suit? Are there a lot of companies now doing this type of work? And I just want to add to that. And of those companies, when hearing you talk about this, when you were here, your passion is very evident. You're very excited about it. Are they just taking advantage of greenwashing, or do you find that a lot of the companies out there are really passionate about making things safe for the environment as well as for the people living in the spaces that they're working on?
I think it's a little bit of both. I believe that there are some companies out there that have started up in the last 20 years that really are focusing on human health. Maybe not to the extent that I do. And it's a very, very niche community of working with people with extreme chemical sensitivities, extreme allergies, and depressed immune systems. There's a lot of designers out there that are now marketing what's called like well-designed homes or well-built homes. There are other material suppliers that are also in the space. I think that the majority of companies that are out there right now that are promoting green are still really focusing on those basics of energy efficiency, recycled content, and global environmental concerns, which of course are very important, but it completely misses the direction of human health.
Thank you. All right, so give me 1 second here. I just gotta pull up my list of trusty questions here for you. So bear with me. And there we are, almost there. Okay. So, okay. Well, actually, we discussed some of these questions yesterday, but this is, this can be a different audience makeup.
Sure.
So I want to, ask some of the stuff like yesterday. I asked you about the mattress. Can you please tell people about mattresses and how they can select a healthy mattress? What are the dangers? Like why are we even talking about a mattress? What could be wrong with the mattress?
Yeah, the biggest danger that we find in traditional mattresses will be the use of chemical additives to whether it's the fabrics to the foam, flame retardants. And I know, of course, state of California has banned the use of certain flame retardants, but they haven't banned the use of all of them. And so it's kind of like we discussed yesterday that when companies take chemicals out of a product because of a regulation, it's not as if they're then told what you put back in has to be healthy. One thing that I need to mention is that there's about 92,000 chemicals right now in that have been invented and are in use in the production of building materials and home goods. Out of those 92,000 chemicals, only about 3% have ever been tested for the toxicological effects in humans. We have absolutely no idea what the other 97% of these chemicals are doing to the human body. And of course, when you combine them with other things that are in the air, that are on your skin, in your foods, we don't know what that's doing to the human body. All right. So my approach is always, let's just go with the least amount of chemical that we can find. And in something like a mattress, to me, that's going with a mattress that uses organic fabrics, certified organic fabrics, organic latex, or the use of metal springs that are actually encased with organic fabrics. There are lots of good companies out there. I talked about a couple of them yesterday. Savvy Rest makes really good latex mattresses. My Green Mattress out of Northern Illinois. I've actually visited that manufacturing plant myself, and I'm shocked. A manufacturing plant that makes fabrics, you would think it would just be loaded with snibbles of fabrics and dust and so forth. It was as clean as a whistle. I was really impressed at how they make their products.
Great. So, what role do you see furniture decor playing in our overall home health? I think that probably something that gets overlooked. And how can homeowners choose healthier options when it comes to those items?
So furniture decor ranks as my fourth largest potential offender of chemical outgassing in a home. So this would be obviously furniture, but then things like window treatments, area rugs, artwork, even your own clothing, I would say, is part of this. And so what do we look for? We look for materials that are as low in chemical emissions as possible. Of course, the question is, how do you know what's low in chemical emissions? There are some certifications out there now that are dealing with this. Most importantly, I believe, is a certification called Green Guard Gold. Green Guard Gold actually tests the product in its usable state, not just as components like some of the independent tests do, but it actually tests the physical product and the way you would get it in your home. And it tests for formaldehyde off-gassing specifically, and it guarantees that that product has less than 7 parts per billion of formaldehyde off-gassing. And to me, that's about as good as it gets from a material you'll bring in your home. Of course, we'd like to have 0, and some of these things that are certified Green Guard Gold are 0 or close to it, but it means they can't have more than 7. And so I look for that. I look for manufacturers that are actually telling you exactly what they use in their products, how they make them. They'll go to great lengths to describe how they procure their raw materials, how they put it together using fabrics that may be certified through OTEX or GOTS or GALS or these other certifications that are out there. You have to pay attention to the marketing. If the companies are talking about how green and eco-friendly their products are, I usually avoid them, because that's telling me that they don't really focus on human health. They're focused on more of the environmental concerns, such as recycled content, and maybe even how they manufacture. Is their manufacturing facility clean? Do they have good air quality for their workers and so forth? Of course, very important, but really nothing to do with your personal health in your home.
Thank you. And you mentioned these certifications, and during our talk yesterday, you mentioned, actually talked extensively about greenwashing.
Mm-hmm.
How do we know that a certification is anything more than, I think you mentioned a story about a company that had, a side company that was certifying their own products, and it meant nothing. How do we know which certifications actually guarantee that we're getting a healthier product for our home?
So this is a little difficult sometimes, because I just read an email that I got today from another manufacturer, and on the email it says green certified on the label of this product, and which means it was an in-house marketing decision to put this little symbol on the can and try to sort of trick people into thinking that it has a third-party certification. So I always, when I see a certification I've never heard of before, I immediately go to the internet and I look at who put this certification together. I remember years ago, there was an organization called the Carpet and Rug Institute, and they put together what's called the CRI Green Label for the certification of carpeting. Well, I did a little more research and found out the CRI actually was comprised of all the carpet manufacturers that got together, and they created their own little consortium. And they said, how can we come up with a certification that we can pretty much meet, but it's not really going to hurt us financially? And that's what they did. And we see that with paint companies. We see it with some furniture companies. They're coming up with these certifications that are just essentially another form of marketing or greenwashing, as I talked about yesterday. So you really have to do that research and find out what the certifications are. Luckily, 20 years ago, the green industry was literally the Wild West. You could say anything, do anything. There was nobody there to police you and to tell you that you are wrong or ask you to prove what you're saying. These days, it's starting to boil down now to the true organizations. Again, Green Guard it's been around for a very long time, and their certifications have always been top of the line. Scientific Certifications is another organization that has really good indoor air quality certifications. As a matter of fact, they took over the certification for another flooring test called Floor Score. Now, while I like the fact that it's now independently run, independently operated, the information you get off of some of these tests doesn't necessarily help you besides essentially a pass or fail. If you have one type of flooring material that's certified Green Guard Gold and another type of flooring material that's certified Floor Score in their certification, and you try to compare the two, well, the two actually test for a little bit different materials, and they give you results in completely different units of measure. So you really can't compare. And I think they do that on purpose. So they're not trying to pit themselves against each other.
Okay. And most people, they just want to buy stuff. They do want to know it's safe, but they don't have time to research stuff. And even if they do research it, these companies know how to confuse them with what you just said, and they don't have the framework of understanding or the base of knowledge to really interpret what they're reading. Is there a place that tracks the certifications to know whether they're meaningful or whether they're industry scams?
Not really. I would say that there are organizations out there, sales companies, some designers and builders and so forth that would probably track those materials. And I mean, the materials that we would supply, everything that we have available is something that we have personally vetted to know that it's essentially the best of the best. But if you look at all of the presenters and all the topics in your conference these last several days, you'll notice that all this information is here to learn and then research beyond, but it's not information you're going to get just going into your doctor and going into a store or into a grocery store. And the fact of the matter is that we all have to come to conferences like this and learn from each other. And the best thing we can do is, once you find out the truth, is to pass it along to family and friends. I would say out of all the clients we have on an annual basis, I would say the majority of them are either repeat customers or friends, family, neighbors, or they heard me talk somewhere. Again, they're finding out because they are doing the research. Those people who are going to the big box stores and they're essentially just buying products because it has the word green on it, they're not learning right now. And unfortunately, it may come a time down the road where something tragic happens, where somebody in the home gets sick, or they think they're doing the right thing and it's not improving their health. And then they'll end up doing a little more research and finding events like this.
Thank you. What are your thoughts on the use of natural pest control methods, and how can homeowners make the switch to healthier pest control options?
Yeah, this is a tough one because, it depends on the pest and depends on the location around the world. But, I found that you can pretty much use boric acid and diatomaceous earth to control pretty much any crawling pest that there might be, or insect. The flying insects are a little bit more difficult to deal with, and so would things like rodents. But I'm a big believer that sometimes you have to take a step backwards to take two steps forwards. And while I would love to go with natural, non-toxic materials in every application of my life, there are certain things that if you have a problem, you have to deal with it, and deal with it as safely as you can. But I wouldn't skimp on the ideas, because if you're dealing with it for months and years down the road, who knows what other problems it's causing in the home, both with the home and with the health of the occupants. You just want to take care of it and move on.
Thank you. How do you address the issue of mold and other environmental toxins, and what steps can homeowners take to prevent these issues from arising in the first place?
Absolutely enormous topic, especially these days. I would say in the last few years, mold has become one of the most prevalent phone calls that I get. It used to be 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, 8 out of 10 people who booked an appointment with me would be talking about chemical sensitivities and chemical emissions. And now it's probably 6 or 7 out of 10 calling to talk about mold. And the reason is because we know more about it. And I think people are a little bit more aware of what it can do to your health. I think that the thought has been, up until the last 5 years, you know what, mold is everywhere. We can't do anything about it. We just have to learn to live with it because mold is natural. Now, that is partially true. Mold is natural, mold is everywhere, and mold is outside at measurable amounts. But the mold that's dangerous for humans, the mold that can start to proliferate and actually colonize on the building materials of your home, like drywall, paper, and studs, can be not only detrimental to the home itself, but also extremely toxic to the occupants. As mold is being threatened by either losing its food source or an attempt to take care of it through the use of completely wrong materials like bleach, what will happen is mold will release mycotoxins, essentially as a cry for help. And those mycotoxins can be enormously bad for the everyday average person. And in the last several years, we've learned more about those toxicological effects. And I believe more people now are just willing to ask the question, like, hey, is this something I should look at? I should take care of. So how do people take care of it in their own homes? Well, in order for molds to colonize and become problematic, you need a food source. And that's typically either an organic material, and that can be something as simple as, again, drywall paper or wood studs. Or it could be what we all see from time to time in our main bathroom, where you get little spots of mold in the corners of the walls or in the ceiling. And that's because mold spores that are naturally in the air can attach to these food sources. And those would be dead skin cells and soap scum. And it just starts to grow because you always have what you need, which is a food source, warmth, and moisture. If you can get rid of the moisture in your home, or at least lower it below 50% relative humidity, and make sure that all the surfaces in your home are also low of moisture, then mold is not normally going to be very problematic inside of a house. There are exceptions, of course. But for the most part, what we can all do is keep our humidity down below 50%. Make sure you have good ventilation. I'm not talking about just fresh air coming from the outside, but air movement within the house. Make sure that you use an air purification system, whether it's portable purifiers in various rooms or a whole house filtration system. And always have the air handling system in your home running. Even if you have no need for heat or air conditioning. You know, today here in Wisconsin, it's a perfect 70 degrees and sunny, and all the windows are open in the house, which is great for air movement. But when you have to close those windows because it gets a little chilly at night or gets a little too warm, you want to make sure that the fan of your system is running to allow for air movement throughout the home, allow for purification of what goes through the ducts. And it also keeps corners of the rooms having stagnant air, and stagnant air is what mold really likes to thrive.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And I think people, when they think of mold, the boogeyman of mold is black mold. Are there other kinds of molds? How do we recognize it? And then also, what are symptoms that people may feel, even if they don't see the mold, but but if they know these symptoms, they may suspect mold and look into it.
Sure. Uh, yes, there are many more molds besides just black mold. Black mold, what we all kind of think about is what's called Stachybotrys, which is one that is can happen when you have again lots of moisture, typically in an area like a cavity wall or behind the drywall, where moisture is constantly feeding the mold and the food source, and it actually starts to break apart the wood. It eats away at the wood itself. The mold that we commonly see is not toxic black mold. The mold we normally see is a little bit more of a common, and there's hundreds, if not thousands, of species that we can find in our homes. Matter of fact, some of the species we find in our homes are, I wouldn't say harmless, but they don't actually produce things like mycotoxins, but they can still trigger allergies and asthma. So what happens when somebody walks into a space that has mold? Well, it depends on your level of sensitivity, of course. If somebody who has been poisoned by mold in the past, and they actually have what's called chronic inflammation response, they can walk into a home and almost instantaneously tell you that there's mold in the house, because they will feel it in all of their nerves. They'll feel it, whether it's tingling of the fingers, whether it's an instant headache, even having blurred vision, all the way to worse, anaphylactic shock can be triggered by exposure to mold. The average person who doesn't have that serious of an issue, who's exposed to mold in their home, could just feel like this general malaise, flu-like symptoms, upset stomach, headache, and then once mold becomes part of the body, you can actually have mold mycotoxins within your body. And now that can be caused either from the building environment, or the built environment around you, or it can be caused by your food source. And there's lots of research that's coming out now that is showing that mold in the body is more predominantly from your food source than the building materials. But I've yet to see any definitive study that proves otherwise. So we always would err on the safe side. And if you do have mold mycotoxins in your body, you have to look at all aspects of living to see where it possibly could be coming from.
And if I understood you correctly, did you say bleach was not a good way to remediate mold?
No, bleach is not a good way at all. So I know that's what a lot of people commonly use: bleach or vinegar or hydrogen peroxide. These materials, what they'll do is so let me step back. Some people call mold, they call mildew, like it's a different type of product. Mildew is essentially mold. Mildew is mold that just hasn't had a chance to really grow roots yet. All right. So mildew is what we normally see like in a bathroom, where it's just a superficial area or patch of a discoloring, because again, you have dead skin cells and soap scum stuck to the wall, and that you can wipe off with a bleach, or better yet, just use hot water and a surfactant cleaner. You don't necessarily need something like bleach, because it's going to come right off. Once it's begun to sort of take root, if you use bleach, what'll happen is it'll take away the color of the mold, but it won't kill the roots of it, and it'll continue to grow. And when it comes back, it'll come back stronger. And so, if you believe that mold has taken root, do not use something that'll just clean the surface and take away that color, but you really need to do more investigation to find out if you even can kill it from the surface, or do you have to cut out the drywall or cut out the wood and replace it, because at some point it's not fixable by just a simple cleaning.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. So, changing the topic from mold, how do you approach the issue of electromagnetic radiation in the home, and what steps can homeowners take to reduce their exposure to EMF?
So I know there are some really, really good experts on this topic that usually when it gets to be a situation where it's really involved, I'll bring in an expert to specifically talk about that, because these are folks that I know from the Building Biology Institute, and they are electrical engineers, and I'm not an electrical engineer whatsoever. But I can tell you that the biggest problem we have in our homes right now from an EMF standpoint would be from Wi-Fi, from things like, cell towers and so forth. These are more problematic because they have an ability to travel much farther and to penetrate walls and penetrate into the cells of your body. And so usually I'll have to find out and let's say I had a client that called up and we're helping them design a new home to be completely healthy. And the topic of EMFs will come up and they'll say, we're concerned about it, but we don't have any acute situations with it right now. What can we do to limit our exposure? Well, the first thing I'll do is ask them to hire a building biologist who's in their area to literally walk around the land with a handheld meter to see if they can locate, what direction the cell tower might be and where it's coming from. And then as we design the home, we can put in barriers within the walls. There are some mesh materials, some fabric materials that we can use behind the drywall. So those magnetic or those RF waves won't come through the walls. Then you got to deal with the windows, because there's a real chance that a higher amount can come through the window. So there are films you can use. Then we have to think about what elevation of the home it is and what's right behind that wall. If it's a bedroom, we really need to be concerned, and we really need to block those waves. If it's a utility room or a garage, an area where you're really not there quite often, or as much as a bedroom, we're not as concerned about it. From a standpoint of electromagnetic field, because of wiring, because of appliances and so forth, this is where we're getting into addressing the dirty electricity that's found in alternating current that supplies our homes. And that can be taken care of through the use of filters. You can also do whole house grounding to eliminate some of that dirty electricity. And then even more, I would say, simple things such as the use of kill switches in the bedrooms, where it literally shuts the power down all around the bedroom at night, so that there is no possibility that EMF coming from the wiring could harm you and cause disruption to REM sleep.
And there are some products on the market that claim to be able to block the EMFs, like they kind of radiate their own signal. I'm not exactly sure how they work. I don't know if you've heard of these types of products. And they make personal versions, they make whole house versions. Have you heard of them, and do they work?
I've heard of them. I haven't heard much success with them in real life application. There are other things out there that are plugged into outlets throughout your home. I believe they're called Stetzerizers, Stetzerizer filters, and that does a good job in reducing or eliminating dirty electricity. But these are things that I would recommend if you wanted to have this addressed in your home, that you do find a building biologist that knows how to address this properly. I've seen situations where people end up using way too many of these filters, and there can be a detrimental effect, as well as utilizing these other sort of new concepts of these personal devices that really, in practical sense, just really don't work.
Thank you. And what are your thoughts on the use of household or house plants to promote healthy indoor air quality? And which plants do you recommend that homeowners use?
I think the use of plants is smart. I'm in favor of using any tool we have at our disposal to make our homes indoor air quality better. However, this is another situation where there could be too much of a good thing. And what I mean by that is, I know people who end up putting half a dozen plants in every room, and then you end up with a mold problem in your house because you have all this soil. That soil naturally contains mold spores. And the home itself stays at a higher humidity because of all the watering. There's more mold spores, and it ends up becoming more problematic. So I think you have to use everything sort of in limitation. I don't know specific plants. I know that ferns have always been ones that have been high in the list for good indoor air quality. Basically, any plant that has lots of little leaves, any a house plant with lots of little leaves is good for this because there's more surface area to breathe essentially. So, but beyond that, just limit them because you could cause other problems.
Great. And how about, going to some talking about cleaning products? How about the use of essential oils for home health, and how do you incorporate it into your cleaning products and other home care routines?
Sure. So, I have kind of a contrary opinion on essential oils, mainly because, again, my experience of working with people with extreme chemical sensitivity. They have taught me over the years that essential oils are just as bad for them as a chemical coming off of the surface. Now, that doesn't mean that it's bad for everybody, of course. These are people who have a very extreme health issue. But it got me to do a little bit of digging many years ago about this. And I learned that with essential oils, the human body can tolerate exposure to essential oils for about 15 minutes before it starts to have a negative effect on the body. And so I have no problem with the average person using them, provided that they use them sparingly and not use them to mask the odors that are found in your home. People use fragrances to mask the fact that they have a problem with their air quality, to mask the fact that they maybe didn't clean properly, they have a mold problem, they've got other issues going on in the home. And I think essential oils, it's one of those things where it's because it smells good, whatever you're using. You can say, well, I'll just use a little bit of this, and then you become sort of accustomed to it. The more you use it, the more you have to use, because again, the body has the ability to mask things naturally. So think of best example I can give you is the paint industry. Many, many years ago, there was a company called Ed Dwiggins Paint. Nobody's ever heard of Ed Dwiggins Paint. Ed Dwiggins Paint came out with a paint that they put a lemon scent into the paint. And they advertised it as, when you're painting the walls, your home smells like fresh cut lemons. And this was 100% to hide the smell of the chemicals used in paint. This is what's called a chemical masking agent. Now, Ed Dwiggins stopped making that paint probably within 2 years because they found that the chemicals that they used to create the lemon scent actually turned rancid over a period of time, and now your walls smelled like rotten lemons. But the technology, the concept still exists. Paint manufacturers use a lot of other chemicals that nobody's ever heard of, and I can't pronounce, and it's not even on the label because it makes up less than 1% of the volume. And these chemicals counteract the smell of the chemicals that give you that traditional paint smell. So this is what's called a chemical masking agent. It's used extensively in the paint industry. And so when you smell a paint that's called zero VOC and green and air friendly and all this stuff, you'll say, boy, I don't even smell paint. This is great. The chemicals are still there, probably more of them, and it's still causing those problems. Now, getting back to essential oils, I believe that essential oils are essentially the exact same thing for most people. There are certain situations where using essential oils is probably good medicinally speaking, but I think we overuse them. And because we're hit with all these different scents throughout the day, it numbs our senses and it causes a detrimental effect.
So I just want to clarify my understanding of what you're saying to make sure that the audience understands it. So you're saying that the essential oil itself may be fine, may have medicinal value, aromatherapy may be great or whatever, But if you're using it to cover the smell of your house, you may still have something underlying that's dangerous, and you're going to miss out on that fact, and you're not going to treat it because you're just putting your a fragrance over it.
So yes, it's actually both. It's yes, you might be covering something else up that you could take care of, or you should take care of, and the fact that we're probably utilizing them too much. I think that again, what I read years ago and talked to a number of holistic healthcare practitioners, and they agreed that too much exposure, and usually 15 minutes at a time, you can use them throughout the day, but just for no more than about 15 minutes. Wait several hours and use it again for another 15 minutes. But just any longer than that, it can actually be problematic.
And in your answer just a moment ago, you mentioned the fact that there may be chemicals in the paint, or I'm assuming in other products as well, that aren't listed because they're less than 1% of volume. Is that a thing, that they don't have to list ingredients regardless of the toxicity? So it could be completely terrible for you, and they don't need to list it as long as it's less than 1%?
Exactly right. So this is a good opportunity to discuss what's called the safety data sheet, or material safety data sheet. I think it's been customary for anybody who is interested in learning more about what they're using in their home to request or download from their website the safety data sheet for, let's say, a paint or an adhesive or flooring material, what have you. A safety data sheet was developed many, many years ago to assist firefighters and first responders on how to deal with a spill on the highway, a train accident, an industrial accident, and then how to protect the body in order to go back in there to do cleanup. Okay. Safety data sheets are not a health declaration whatsoever. They're not a declare label. They don't tell you everything that's in the product. By law, a safety data sheet only has to tell you what makes up more than 1% of the volume if it's deemed to be hazardous and it would require cleanup issues. And if it's part of what's called a proprietary blend, which happens in the industry all the time, they don't have to list it because they don't want to divulge their secrets and have somebody make the product that they've invented. So the safety data sheets are really just pointless in my mind, because the manufacturer only has to list certain things and only at certain quantities. Now, this means that you could have 10 to 15 different, I mentioned this before, what are called formaldehyde donors. Formaldehyde donors are these ingredients that each one of them makes up less than 1% of the volume, so none have to be listed. But when they combine, when you paint the wall, all these donors come together and it turns into formaldehyde during the curing process. None of these chemicals need to be listed on the MSDS. So therefore, the manufacturers are hiding the fact that they're not using formaldehyde as an ingredient. They're making formaldehyde on your wall. But because it's not more than 1%, and you're not buying it in a cured state or a dry state, you're buying it in a liquid state, they don't have to divulge it.
Wow. Okay. And do you use products where you know the exact ingredients? So if someone comes to you, you know that they don't have something that's going to be making formaldehyde on their wall?
So yes and no. So yeah, I know that the products that we have here, I personally test specifically for formaldehyde off-gassing, because that is a key trigger for people with allergies, asthma, and chemical sensitivities. If the manufacturer provides what's called a declare label, and that means that it's going to show every ingredient they have. And then it's up to me to look at those ingredients and say, well, how can they combine and turn into some nasty things? If I can't do that, just from my own research, I'll do the formaldehyde testing. And then I also use just anecdotal information from my clients. Again, clients, I've worked with over 30,000 clients over the years, and most of them with chemical sensitivities, and they're the ones telling me this works. I've used it, and they've used it, and it's worked great for them for the last so many years. So I can pretty much trust that, if the canaries in the mine shaft are doing okay, it's good for the rest of us.
Great. And what are your thoughts on the use of natural building materials, and how can homeowners choose healthier building materials for their homes?
I think that the use of natural building materials has to be done in a very, very um, detailed manner. It has to be planned. I'm not a big believer in using natural building materials for reducing a chemical load in the home, because there's a lot of natural materials that aren't very safe for humans. Um, the biggest issue for me is there's a sort of an argument in the construction industry, and it's always been around, it always will be around, between, do you want to build a home that breathes, or do you want to build a home that doesn't breathe? And what I mean is, do you want to build a home where air from the outside can come into the home through the walls, and essentially your walls are are the lungs of your home, right? My thought is, no, you don't want to build a home that the walls are your lungs, because you know what happens is, when you get something foreign in your lung, it can turn into a problem. And I don't want that to happen within your walls, because that means it can turn into a mold problem. I would rather build a home in a concrete box that is completely non-breathable. And the only way you get fresh air in that home is by introducing it through the use of uh, energy recovery ventilators and bringing in fresh air. This allows me to bring the fresh air in, purify it, and put it into the rooms. I know exactly where it's coming from. I know exactly what the humidity level is. I know that it's pure air and it's not damaging my walls. A natural built home, homes that are built with certain types of material that allow for the breathability of the walls. This is why we got into problems years ago with homes. You know, homes that are built in up until the late 1990s or late 1980s were built so those walls breathed quite a bit. And what happened was, as we incorporated some unnatural materials into the mix, some plastics, Tyvek, things like that, now we've slowed down the breathing of the walls, and we've locked moisture in the cavity of the wall. And this is where we run into mold problems. And so either the walls need to breathe or the walls do not need to breathe. You can't have it in the middle, because in the middle is where we run into problems. And so you definitely have to work with a professional who knows how to detail those things properly, so you don't end up with a bigger problem down the road.
What advice do you have for individuals looking to create a healthier home environment? And what are simple steps yet effective for anyone so that they can improve their home health?
Yeah. So I think that improving a home, and let's say it's an existing home and you just want to make it healthier, the number one thing I'll tell you to do is rip out the carpeting in your house. And I mentioned this yesterday in the talk, and I can't say it enough. Carpeting is by far one of the most toxic things you can have in your house. And I don't care if it's 5 years old or 15 years old or what have you, unless it's a brand that is specifically dealing with synthetic chemical free materials and ingredients, which I would say for everybody listening, maybe one person has this type of carpet in their house. Most of the carpet we use is going to be made from 100% synthetic chemicals. The average carpet today has between 600 and 1,200 chemicals in it. And these chemicals can off gas. I've tested carpet that's up to 31, 32 years old that off gases toxic levels of formaldehyde. So if you were to rip out your carpet and just live on the subfloors, that would actually be healthier. It's not comfortable, it's loud, it's dusty. We know this, but at least you're not being inundated with that chemical throughout the day and throughout the night. So at that point, then choosing healthier flooring materials, and that can be anywhere from a harder surface that's easier to clean to a healthier carpet, a natural wool carpet, not treated with any pesticides or chemical dyes. This would actually improve the indoor air quality tremendously in your home. The second thing you do is, I think for the average person, just clean up the cleaning materials that you're using in your house. I think if you go into the closet, the utility closet of anybody's home, there's probably 15 to 20 different solutions that pretty much all do the same thing, but they're designed for different areas of the home. You can usually take care of everything in your house with a simple make it yourself, vinegar, baking soda and water or borax, to even buying something that is designed to be a catch-all product, something like a Branch Basics or AFM, a multi-purpose cleaner, or Shackley Basic H. Really good products that can clean the whole home. Matter of fact, I've used some of these products to do my laundry. I don't need laundry detergent anymore. You can use one product for the entire house, and not only is it good because you don't have these jars or bottles of material stuck in a closet that could be dangerous if a child gets into it, but it's just not smart to have all these chemicals around the house, and you don't need them. Um, I think that in certain situations, if you had a very specific stain, very specific situation that you had to use something a little bit stronger, then fine, use it, but don't rely on it for your everyday cleaning.
And how would someone go and learn? Is there any good resources to learn about how to make your own cleaning products? Like you mentioned, the vinegar, the baking soda, the water, or borax. It seems a little, I feel like people, you see this in the plant-based world where people don't get started. They don't do it because they feel overwhelmed by all the information or just starting something new. How would someone get started with this? Where can they learn about how to do it?
Boy, there are countless locations online now where you can just get a recipe for making your own at-home cleaner. I know that there's a woman I just met a few weeks ago, owns a company called Tees Organics, TEE, Tees Organics, and she sells a pre-made, healthy, very, very natural and safe cleaner. But she also tells you how you make your own too. The fact is that I think people don't like to make their own because it's inconvenient, and you also worry about what is the shelf life of it, because once you put it together, you probably have to use it within a week, or it starts to, I don't want to say go stale, but it starts to lose its potency, its effectiveness. And so the beauty of buying something that's pre-made is probably a longer shelf life. And so I completely understand that. But I would just say, going to going online and researching this just with a quick Google search. There's also a woman I met years ago who was one of the pioneers in this industry. Her name was Deborah Lynn Dadd, D-A-D-D. I looked up to her as one of my mentors. She passed a few years ago, but before that, she had 30 or 40 years in teaching people how to make their own at-home materials to clean and to take care of our homes. She was a wealth of knowledge, and you can find her books online. You can find her, I think her website still exists, and you can go there just to learn all about how to make your own at-home concoctions.
Great. What measurements do you use to decide what is healthy for our home air, for water, for EMFs, and exposure to toxins and chemicals? And I can break that down for you if you want me to repeat that.
That's a great question, Michael, because years ago, when the EPA started regulating VOCs and volatile organic compounds, they did that solely, and it's still being done today, specifically for outdoor air pollution. It doesn't tell us the whole story inside of a home. So when you go to Amazon and buy a VOC meter and you walk around your house and you go, oh my gosh, the VOCs are super high, it doesn't take in consideration the fact that maybe somebody just put on hairspray, or maybe somebody just peeled the skin off of an orange, which releases 800 grams per liter of VOCs. So you have to understand the source of the VOC. But what it doesn't do, it doesn't discern the difference between the VOCs that are harmful, directly harmful to humans, and the VOCs like that comes from an orange that's completely harmless to humans. So I look at a VOC meter as being, I don't want to say it's worthless in monitoring your indoor air quality, but it's only a very, very small part of the whole picture. You also have to look at where's the source of the VOC, and then you have to look at more dangerous things such as formaldehyde levels. I think the formaldehyde level in your home is far more detrimental to health, direct health, than the VOC level is. And for that, you can do indoor air quality monitors that give you real-time information. And I would like to see formaldehyde levels. I think the industry has kind of adopted this, 20 parts per billion is the threshold. I'd like to see it less than 15, less than 10. We like to reduce that as much as possible, but 20 is a good start. I've been in people's homes with handheld meters and walking around and finding that their levels are at 100 parts per billion or higher. 100 parts per billion is what OSHA uses for occupational hazards in a manufacturing facility. And if your level is at 100 parts per billion or higher for 4 hours, everybody's out of the building. All right. If your home is at 100 parts per billion and it's constantly, you have got some serious formaldehyde issues in your house, and it's probably dealing with the building materials. So I look at, yeah, go ahead.
No,
Go ahead.
please continue. Please continue.
Well, so I look at formaldehyde, VOCs as part of it as well, a smaller part of it. I also look at particulate counts. Particulates would be certain things like dust particles that are made up of dead skin cells and fabric particles and so forth. Even mold spores. All this together gives us sort of a bigger picture now of what's actually happening in the house, and also can give us then some guidelines of what do we need to do to make it safer.
So you mentioned formaldehyde being, the one thing that you would really be concerned about. What are symptoms that people would go, oh, maybe I should check for formaldehyde toxicity?
Yeah, formaldehyde is definitely the first symptom. Is like this flu-like symptom. Nausea is big. Headache is big. If you can recognize formaldehyde even by smell, and so I want everybody to imagine, maybe not in their current house, maybe in their current house, but maybe in an apartment they once lived in, and they use these really cheap cabinetry in the apartment. Imagine, going into the kitchen and opening up the cabinet door, and you get this waft of this sweet smell in the face. That's formaldehyde. And that's coming from the particle board and the glues and the finishes and all that stuff. So we recognize what that smell is. Inside of our home, because there's such a volume of air just in a room, you're not necessarily getting smacked in the face with it, but you will have, again, flu-like symptoms. Nausea, headaches, dizziness is a big one. It can lead to a bigger neurological disorders. And so if you're feeling any of this, best way, besides describing what happens in an apartment with cheap cabinetry, if you ever moved into a new home and the whole family's excited to move into the new house, you get in there and within a week, everybody in the house gets sick. And most people just chalk it up to, well, we've all been stressed out because of the move and because of the build. It's really big for us, and everybody's just kind of winding down from moving into this new house. It's not the stress. It's the fact that your home has typically a high formaldehyde count from the building materials that were used. And because there's also a high moisture reading in the house because of all the building materials, it exacerbates the off-gassing. So your home needs to be cleaned up and needs to be purified. And that's through fresh air, purification, maybe even removing and replacing some of those materials that you use, because there's really no way to completely purify a home if you still have that off-gassing carpeting or those cabinets that are causing that problem.
So in order of importance, because this is like very overwhelming. Like, when I spoke to you yesterday, it's kind of like, I'm looking around where I live, and it's like everyone's a criminal. Everything I'm looking at is a criminal, right? It's I suspect everything now. So thank you for that. But in order of importance, what are the most important things in our house to focus on first? The water, the indoor quality, the wireless, radiation, the off-gassing of your mattress or whatever, the cleaning products. What else? Like, what are the things that you think of if someone's going to get started with this? What is the biggest bang for the buck?
Well, so first off, I want to tell you and everybody that my goal is not to scare the hell out of everybody. And I know I do. It's just a function of being in this business for so long and what I've seen and what I've dealt with. But it's also it's not as a daunting task as I make it out to be. I think that most people, if they're not having specific acute situations with health within the home, then I wouldn't necessarily worry about it. I've had so many clients over the years that um, they've called me because they read an article I wrote, or they read a book that somebody else wrote. They heard a podcast and they called up. They say, "My house is killing me," and I say, "What's going on?" "Well, we don't have any health issues, but I know it's killing me." That gets to be the extreme, and to that point, then that's just a never-ending battle. So what can you do? Well, you take care of the low-hanging fruit right away. I think that you take care of the cleaning materials, you take care of the laundry detergents, you take care of the things that are easier to obtain and less expensive. And let's face it, all the things I've talked about can be expensive. And, it shouldn't be a situation where you have to choose between whether your kids are going to eat or I'm going to have paint that doesn't off gas. And unfortunately, I've been in that situation way too many times with my clients. And so you have to do things that are obtainable. I think one of the most important things you can do that costs a little bit of money, but it makes a huge impact fast, get an air purifier and put it in your bedroom. Um, I've stressed this a few times throughout the last couple of days. I believe that the bedroom needs to be the healthiest room in the house. That's got to be your sanctuary. That's got to be the place where you come home from being inundated with all this stuff all throughout the day. And when you try to get that 6 to 8 hours of sleep, of restorative sleep every night, you're not going to get that if you are being inundated with chemical all night long, or with dust particles or mold spores. The same thing is true with electromagnetic fields. If you think you have a sensitivity, you're not going to get good quality REM sleep if you're being hit with EMFs all night. And so that could be something as simple as getting like a bed canopy that goes over the bed, kind of like those old mosquito nets, but it actually will block the electromagnetic fields coming into where you're trying to sleep. These things are hugely important. And then beyond that, I think that you incrementally chip away at things that you know are problematic. Don't change something because you think it's a problem. If you think it's a problem, verify that first. Verify that you have a water problem and find out what the water problem is. Is it municipal water that's treated with just chlorine, or is it municipal water treated with chloramines and fluoride? And now you got to get a really more robust water purification system. So don't get the top of the hill water purification system if it's just something as simple as chlorine. If it's well water, have it professionally tested. Let's see what's actually in there and see what we have to deal with, and then we deal with it as we can. So again, making these incremental changes slowly but surely will make a huge improvement in the health of everybody in the household.
So in regarding the air purifier, is there a brand or a few brands that you would recommend for people to use as more reliable than others?
Yeah, so the two that come up most often so I have a private circle community with hundreds of our clients and customers from over the years, and they really share a lot of information as far as what works, what doesn't work. I'm not there to sell product. I'm not here to sell product either. I'm here just to provide the information. The ones that I've worked with over the years are a brand called Austin. I think it has the most amount of carbon in any purifier that I've seen from a portable standpoint. Does a really good job with chemicals, off-gassing of different building materials. Another brand that seems to be spoken very highly of, I don't have personal experience with, but is the Air Doctor brand. A lot of my circle community members have spoken very highly about the Air Doctor brands. And then the third is IQ Air, and they make both portables and whole home filters that hooks up to the HVAC system. I recommend whole house filters. I think it's better ultimately for the health of everybody in the home. If you do have an acute health situation with somebody there, again, put a portable in the bedroom as well as the whole house purifier. I work with a brand called Solace Air RS4. I've personally installed that in dozens of homes across the country, and it's worked very well for people. There are a lot of good brands out there. You just need to, find somebody that you can take advice from. family and friends have been in similar situations, see what they use and what works well for them. I think that they'd probably be your best judge of this.
So, a lot of people have fireplaces. They love the kind of the romantic feeling of making a fire in their fireplace. How does that affect air quality? What are the dangers of having a fireplace?
So traditional wood burning fireplaces that have like an open front, that open up the grate and just put a log in. From an air quality standpoint, those are probably the worst things you can have for a fireplace because of the particulates from the smoke itself. If you want that look and that feel, there are products out there that are made mainly in Europe. There's a brand that I've worked with over the years called Race, RAIS, and Race stoves are wood burning stoves that are completely open up the door and put a log in, but the smoke goes through a secondary combustion in the pipe, so that you don't have those same particulates that you would get wafting back into the space. So those are a lot better. If you still want the look and the feel and hear the crackling of the wood, that would be the way to go. And then the other way would be a gas stove. You got to be careful with those. You have to make sure that they're fully sealed and vented to the outside, because you certainly don't want to have any of that combustion coming back in the house. And then the new wave of stoves that have been coming out are kind of like the idea of a gas stove, but they use different types of fuel. They use things like butane or odorless kerosene and other things that, again, fully sealed, vented to the outside, but there's no ability for any of that combustion to get into the house. And they typically don't use fake wood logs. They use glass, broken glass, to give you that real shiny, flickery effect. So there are ways to do it that are healthier. You just have to, choose wisely.
Thank you. What are our TVs doing to us as far as EMFs or electric fields? Is that okay? Is that something that we should be concerned about? Are there TVs that are worse than others? Are the new, flat screens that have come out over the last decade or so worse than the old school or better?
I think from a standpoint of direct human health, probably the worst things we have in our homes are these smart devices. And just about every TV you find nowadays is a smart TV. Same holds true, though, with new wash machines and refrigerators and even stoves and ovens. Anything that's connected to Wi-Fi means that it's constantly searching for a Wi-Fi signal, which means you're going to get more of those radio waves in the home. If you do have a TV that's considered a smart device, disconnect it from the internet, disconnect it from any Wi-Fi. I try to, and it's impossible these days, I know, but I try to limit my exposure to Wi-Fi as much as I possibly can. And everything that I'll do will be hardwired. I can use things like Bluetooth headsets, because Bluetooth doesn't have that radio wave that's problematic for us. But if you're going to use the internet in your home, and you're on a laptop or a pad of some sort, you can actually buy adapters to hook up these devices to a direct line. And so the same thing is true with all of your, again, TV and so forth. You have to have internet for your TV to make sure it's hardwired. Beyond that, I think that it's just like any other electrical appliance in our home. We don't want to be very close to it. I remember years ago, growing up in the 70s, and my parents always yelling at me because I was too close to the TV, right? And I think that's because they didn't want my eyes to go blurry. But I think nowadays, you need to stay away from the TV. I'd rather have you get a larger TV and sit further away from it. I think that's actually healthier for us.
So you would recommend, if you have the option to use an internet cable, like an Ethernet cable, in order to hook up the TV and shut off the Wi-Fi, basically, is what I'm hearing.
100%. 100%.
All right, great. Should we try to live far away from a main road to lower air pollution? How important is
that? I think the difference is whether you're living in a rural environment versus a city environment, right? I think that if you live off of a rural highway, a rural 2-lane highway, I don't think that you're really going to be subjecting yourself to the amount of air pollution that you would be if you lived in an apartment in downtown Chicago. And so I personally think that it's better to live a little bit further away from pollutants. But I definitely don't advocate for everybody having to find their 30 acres somewhere in the middle of nowhere. We still need to be connected to people somehow, and connected to our family and friends. But the way that air pollution sort of travels, unless you're in really deep in the middle of nowhere, or you're right in the middle of a city, that kind of an in-between areas, the suburbs and more rural suburbs, really aren't much different than each other.
So you mentioned a moment ago about you're not really worried about the Bluetooth. What's the difference between Bluetooth, wireless radiation, electric fields, and magnetic fields, and which one should we be should concern us, and how do we measure and fix any of the stuff that we discover?
Yeah, and again, that's something that I would probably have you talk to electrical experts on. All I can say is that in my time with the Building Biology Institute, the one thing that I really learned, my good takeaway on this was, if you're using Bluetooth-enabled devices aren't the same type of microwave or radio frequency wave that you would find in a cell phone. So if I have a cell phone and I put it up to my ear, you're getting that microwave directly, and it can travel millimeters to centimeters into the body. All right. Bluetooth doesn't do that. And so at least from what the experts have told me, if you're using a Bluetooth device, you're not going to get that same direct involvement from the microwave. So, and how do you measure it? It's by the use of what are called tri-field meters to measure the different wavelengths. Again, in a home, I would say that Wi-Fi, or anything that's connected to a cell tower, or if you have what's called a wireless router in your house, so you have an Ethernet cable or a coax cable from the cable company into your home for your internet and your television. If you put that to a wireless router, and now you have wireless internet throughout your house, that's as detrimental as a wave coming from a cell tower. Maybe not be as strong, but it's closer to us as well. So I want to limit waves coming from cell towers. I want to limit waves coming from wireless routers.
Okay, and we got about 4 minutes left. What so 5G, to the experts that you talk to, do you talk to them about 5G?
Yeah, we've talked quite a bit about that. Every iteration of wireless cell service, gets better and better for us from a standpoint of convenience, but it gets worse and worse for us from a standpoint of health. Now, I've gone back and forth with some of the experts on 5G when it first came out. All of the studies that I have read on wireless cell service, or on the cell waves, really kind of stopped at 4G. And there hasn't been a lot of definitive research done on 5G to say that it is far worse than 4G, except, and this is the big except, if you drive around and you see these giant cell towers, at the top of it are these giant radars or devices emanating the signal. That's not 5G. The ones that are 5G are the smaller ones that are connected to the corners of buildings, to lampposts outside in the street, to water towers. I even saw some on a farm silo driving today, and it's stronger. The wave is far stronger than 4G from a pipeline standpoint, but not from a distance. So 5G is really strong, but only for a short distance, compared to 4G, which is not as strong but travels further. So I think there needs to be more research done to show like how close or how far away is the safe zone. But then the further you get away from the 5G signal, the less signal you have to use for your devices. And so there's got to be a sort of a sweet spot, and I haven't seen anything that tells me what that is yet.
Thank you. Right, we got about 1 or 2 minutes left. Is there any final thoughts that you would like to leave the audience with?
Well, first off, I mean, thank you everybody for coming to this today. I mean, to show up on a Saturday evening and to listen to me scaring the hell out of people about our homes. Thank you for putting up with me. I say these things because, yeah, it is kind of shocking. That what we're living with. People who lived in homes 100 years ago didn't have to worry about these things. Of course, they had to worry about other things like asbestos and lead and whatnot, but those are things that we could see, right? We could see those problems. And when we found out that asbestos was bad for us, we took it out of our house. But the problems we face today, we don't necessarily see all the time. And so we really have to be a little bit more diligent. And I'm not saying rip down your house and rebuild. What I'm saying is, if it's time to repaint one of the rooms in your house, maybe do a little more investigation on buying a paint that's not going to cause problems for anybody living in the house. If it's the same price, the same colors available, and you can get it relatively quickly, these are things that we can be doing on a very easy basis. If it's time to remodel your kitchen, then we can help remodel your kitchen with completely toxin-free building materials, right? But don't rip out your kitchen cabinets now unless you really need to. All right. So choose these things wisely. Do it as you can, and by all means, if you have questions, reach out and talk to somebody who's an expert in this.
Great, Robert. Thank you so much. Can we unmute the audience, please?
Thank you, Andrew.
That was cute. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.